Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to take you on a quick trip today from self to our shared humanity. You will see why this really matters. We live in a very crowded world, close to 7.9 billion people. Many care for others, they seek no immediate reward. As demonstrated in many acts of kindness that we will have seen, for example, in the course of the COVID pandemic. Yet the primary dynamic of global economic exchange for these 7.9 billion people is not ruled by care and equity, but by self-interest. And I'm not just talking about contracts and purchase of goods in the stock market. I'm talking about the fact that it sets the frame for your life and the way that you live it and the values which are built into that life. And I suggest you probably don't see it. It's like a fish in water. The environment is all around us. And like the fish, we tend not to see it. But there are consequences. And I'll go through some of these quite quickly. Firstly, it means the result is, over a period of time, that a very, very small number of people control everything for everybody else. Indeed, there are 8 men who control as much wealth as 50% of the rest of the world. 3 large organizations or asset managers basically control the American stock market, including 90% of the largest corporations. And of course, given that basically profit is what ultimately matters, it also means that the COVID crisis was actually a benefit, not necessarily a problem. The 10 richest men in the world increased their wealth by $500 billion in that period of time, which would have been enough to pay for the vaccine for everybody and prevent anyone falling into poverty because of the virus. And let's go to the top, to Jeff Bezos, the richest man on earth, that are coming in at least this week at $179 billion. Where was he at the time? Well, he actually made $92 billion during the course of the COVID pandemic up so far. But where was he? He was in outer space on the 20th of July, playing in his new Shepard rocket ship, but starting up a tourist industry for the future, which of course 8 weeks later was picked up by Elon Musk. And the cost of this voyage, this trip, this cruise, as opposed to going to Vanuatu, for example, this cruise costs $199 million. There could be no more appropriate demonstration or signal of the massive inequality, because they're flying over people, and there's 700 million people down there who earn less than $2, less than $2 a day. And indeed, with the COVID crisis, there may well be another 150 million that may be following them down that path. The next thing is about environment. We're not walking on it, but we're stamping on it. So we're seeing, as it's becoming extremely a big issue in the media at the moment, the impact on climate change, primarily because of self-profit focused human industry over the time since the Industrial Revolution, so many years, so 250 years ago. I'll look very quickly at that evidence. The year 2020 was the hottest year on record. There's been over 7,000 climate disasters in the last 20 years, and they've affected poor people much more than rich, and 1.2 million people have died. But more than that, the predictions were that we would reach perhaps, or try and control the world at 1 degree centigrade in the course of the time to 2050. But already, as by a scientific report of very eminent scientists that came out in August by the United Nations, by the year 2030, that's just 8 years away from now, we almost certainly will have raised the temperature of the Earth by 1.5 degrees centigrade. Now let's look even further from that. Let's look upstairs at the top and the bottom, and it's worse. In the Arctic, the temperature is rising 3 times faster. So we're losing 13% of the Arctic ice cap every year. That's an area 3 times the size of Texas since 1979. At the, when was it? At the 29th of July, the temperature at the North Pole was 24 degrees Celsius. These are big things, because what it means is that as the Arctic increasingly starts to melt increasingly fast, it means the oceans are going to rise. So what we see, in fact, at the moment is that with the predictions, we've risen the oceans by about 20 centimeters since, with global warming since the late 1880s. Projected rise is perhaps another 30 centimeters to a meter by the end of the century. But with what's happening in the Arctic, it's entirely possible it may go much, much, much more than that. And do realize, even right now, there's 410 million people that live below 2 meters above the ocean, all of whom will have to be moved at a time when there are many, many people in need across the whole world. And finally, we look at the animals and plants and the world around us. 1 million species are currently threatened with extinction. And more significantly, 75% of global food crops, which depend on animal pollination, are threatened. That's our living. That's who we are. It's our food. What I also suggest, and I'll do this very briefly, is that it's part of our daily life. If you look around you, in terms of the way we live in suburbs that are more to do with looking after cars and privacy rather than about community, is to do with the way we tend to use objects as a way of showing who we are. Status symbols. The way communication is going in social media, for example. Contemporary communication, where truth really is not accompanied by tests, but by the number of people who decide to put a hit on that particular item within the social media, and in particular, where love is turned into its opposite, into having, into the number of people that you can point to, number of hits you can point to on your Facebook page, having friends, as opposed to giving and being involved with other people in care. So we have a blanket of self-interest-based economics over all our humanity and our social life, and it's very, very destructive for us and our future. Where did our humanity go? And you might notice, as in this picture, COVID has been creeping up as well. And that actually causes significant issues for us, probably a bit longer term than we would certainly hope. So this is what we face. The self and greed are there. The economic system frames our human action and has left us now on a precipice, developed because of global economic self-interest, which cause exploitation and damage to our planet to get there, and massive inequality. And we're looking down through COVID, which is a massive pandemic, at our future, which is in fact uncertain. But my point is, this doesn't have to be the way we do things. It doesn't have to be the assumption of economic exchange or theory. We can turn it around to caring and sharing. And that is our strength together, because our strength together is our humanity. Our humanity is what we can be as a human race. Empowered, fulfilled individual whose own identity and meanings are deeply, deeply shared, and caring with other people across our separate worlds. And our goal can be, instead of a self-driven common economy and society, it can be one that's built on relationships to other people. The power of our humanity, of sharing, of caring, of trust, and of integrity about doing that. And this can include economic issues and the economic structure of things. Now I'll show you a few green shoots that are pointing in this very, very fine direction. The first one is 2012. The United Nations changed the main indicator of what is welfare for people. It was previously GDP, or gross domestic product, or gross national product, economic indicators. It is now the World Happiness Report, brought from this delightful small kingdom of Bhutan, from which you can see the gentleman at the bottom of the screen, who I think is lovely, who've had the happiness report as their criteria for the benefit of the people for quite some time. But it is now the World Report, produced every year by the United Nations to see what's happening in the world. And OECD, the Economic Cooperation Development Program, is following suit. Secondly, we've got examples of ways in which this is happening now. Long traditional term Japanese companies that exist now are still using what's called the Sanpo Yoshi or the triple win concept in making decisions and doing business, where the sellers, the buyers, the society are treated with equal care towards harmony. Already it's in place, the idea, and trust is the dimension, not contract. Trust, relationships between people. Now we look at what's happening now. And there's actually, believe it or not, a benefit in the COVID pandemic. And the reason is that, and this is following a Chinese word, weiji, which the way it's been used, particularly in English, is taken to have two elements, one which is danger, the other of which is opportunity. Because everything is thrown in the air and can come down as something quite different. And in fact, what we're finding is that the economists themselves are starting to pay attention too. Suddenly, they too, because of the changes and the fact that everything's been thrown in the air, are starting to see things perhaps differently through what I describe as the circle of wholeness-based economics rather than the self-interest focused economics. I haven't got time to go more than give you two examples. One is two Oxford economists, Paul Collier and John Kay, who concluded their book, Greed is Dead, by pointing out that, in fact, we need to look afresh and build politics beyond individualism in economics. And I think probably more importantly, Dr. Mark Carney, who was the governor of the Bank of England, who then moved on at the end of last year to become an advisor to the United Nations. And he points out, this is the governor of the Bank of England, for heaven's sake. We need to act as an interdependent community, not as independent individuals. So the economists are doing this. And if I can add to that, the basis of what I'm talking about now is also based on some years, 6 years, as a matter of fact, of work that I'm doing in cooperation with the Center for the Creative Economy in Japan, which is based in Kyoto. We already produced the first book, the Kyoto Manifesto for Global Economics, where we're looking at the platform of humanity. And literally 2 weeks ago, I finished the end of the second book, which is the Kyoto Post-COVID Manifesto. In other words, people are looking at possible changes and finding they're quite realistic. I'd then also point out that, in fact, if you look at what really is happening in economics in the world, the source of economic value is changing. It is no longer the large fire-breathing dragons of industry as much as it is creativity, individuals within nurturing communities. And this is where we focus in terms of building a humanity-based future in economics, where the people are, where the subjective relations are, where the reality of dealing with other people, where you can trust and deal with people fairly and equally and care. That's where we start. So let's look briefly at that, and that's where I'll conclude. I like or am inspired by the words of Mahatma Gandhi. In other words, as he said, you have to be what it is that you wish to change. I believe each of us can make a difference. We usually don't think we can, but we most certainly can. To which I'd add a comment from a quote from Hugh Mackay, who is, of course, one of the keynote speakers at the start of this symposium. And I will quote Hugh directly. And he made this comment just quite recently. If we dare to dream of a more loving country, kinder, more compassionate, more cooperative, more inclusive, more harmonious, there's only one way to start turning the dream into reality. Each of us must live as if this is already that country. If enough of us live like that and in turn demand that our elected representatives embrace these same values and aspirations, change will come. Revolutions never start at the top. So what I'm saying is that we're sharing at the center of what our humanity means. We need to pay attention to strengthening community, taking initiatives to engage people in sharing, bringing in resources to support enterprise and creativity, redirecting government funding to focus on creating innovation, creating strength, nurturing, building the power that can be harnessed from within communities. And I'm saying that even ourselves, we can start within our neighborhood. We have the wings to fly. And by a neighborhood, I don't mean just only what's outside your door. I mean the neighborhood of your life, which is many different areas and levels of what that represents. And I have direct experience, because I previously was in a senior position in the United Nations, of actually doing this and seeing it happen and making it work. And that was in this village of Banjarsari. This is one example of a lot in Indonesia. It was basically a slum village, very low income village in the middle of Jakarta, polluted as anything. And we worked with the people, and it was absolutely with their commitment over a period of time to become a green, completely green village. In fact, to become the ecotourism site of Jakarta themselves. And this was ultimately a slum village to start off with. They built enterprise in all sorts of ways, like they could use the plants that they grew for high-rise office blocks, for example, to rent them out. They built industry, they built companies making herbal products, and they had various other things they made money. And to give you just one small example, the young people got very involved in origami because they were doing the recycling of paper. So I brought across a consultant from Tokyo who showed them what was selling in origami in department stores, and they started selling origami from this slum village to the center of Tokyo. Now, what I'm saying about this is not just local. There are ways which we can build the connectedness back to the global if we start there, because we're starting where the people are, we're starting where caring is, we're starting where our relations to others are, and we can expand it as a global movement. This is what I call the circle of wholeness. And I see the circle of wholeness represents the full power of our existential being as social human persons, inclusivity of our full sharing and care for others, guidance from the many domains of human knowledge which connect us into harmony, with caring and knowledge held in relationship by the circle's central point or focus, our own integrity and trust. This is the economics I'm proposing that we can create for the future, and therefore create the world which we need, and even get rid of the kind of problems we have on climate change, because they all are fundamentally interconnected. These are the values of Humanistic Buddhism, the basis of trust, and the words, as Venerable Master Xing Yun reminds us, compassion, which is actually about honesty, integrity, and truth. These are the values of Humanistic Buddhism, and I believe these are the values that are the future platform for the new economics. Thank you very much.